Welcome to Property Showcase, the podcast that brings you closer to the service providers that can inform your decisions about how you buy, manage and research top investment opportunities. Be informed and become a better investor with Property Showcase.
G'day everyone and welcome back to another segment of the Property Showcase. I'm your host Tom Gilmore, Partnerships Manager at Smart Property Investment. Today's topic, jumping straight into it, is combining data and the human touch to find and secure a profitable property. To help me through this, I've actually asked one of our favourite guests on the Smart Property Investment Show here, Arjun Paliwal. You may recognise his name. He's been with us now for quite some time. You would have heard him on the SPI show. You would have heard him on the Property Showcase previously. And of course, stories galore on smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. He is the Director of InvestorKit and also the REB Award winner 2020. Arjun, how are you going?
Very good. Thank you, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry about the embellishing of the intro there. I hope you enjoyed it.
I can't complain.
So you've given here to me 5 steps to this topic, combining data and the human touch. But before we get into those 5 steps, why is this so important?
Well, the 5 steps showcase a bit of the behind the scenes of what professionals like myself do, especially when it comes to selecting profitable property. But why it's important to double down into now is we're in some uncertain times during COVID. And, I think when you think of whether you're using professional support or not, it's important to understand if you're not using it, what's happening and what's going on in the space of people who are using it, what process are they going through that's different. But then also to understand we're in a very low stock market. And what low stock market means is either it's good things from the vendor side of things where they have a high buyer demand, but on the bad side of things, it means overpaying, emotion, mistakes, and those with any sort of lack of process or strategy or even lack of relationships. I'd say all 3 are going to occur. And so what I want to do is really just talk to that why, especially with these 5 steps that go into what really is the breakdown of professional buying, what actually occurs behind the scenes, and take it from there.
Okay, interesting. All right, well, let's jump straight into it. Everyone listening, first one, strategy and macro research. What does that mean?
So just think about for a moment where you're trying to find this next perfect investment property. You're stuck between, the right property or the right property for you. And this is a mistake that many investors make. I want cash flow, I want capital growth, I want all of this stuff, and they just expect it to come up. Now, for some, these properties may make the right foot in terms of their strategy and where they are, but for some, they just need to go into a complete different direction and focus in on something. So one of the first key steps we always work on with buyers is really focusing on A, strategy, but B, macro research. And during COVID, macro research is even more important than ever. You might know your backyard. You might know that suburb. Now, with that suburb that you're thinking of, and it's starting to look good with all this fancy data showing, oh, wow, this graph looks like it's moving up. I want you to imagine all these properties that would usually sell over the last 12 months have been not occurring at the same rate. Now, all of a sudden, you get one very, very expensive property sell, and it makes it look like a suburb's booming. And this is what you call data volatility. So how we're trying to eliminate that is macro research that doesn't start so small suburbs. It actually starts greater, not LGA greater, because then you could be buying in most of Brisbane just by looking at Brisbane Council. It's not going to give you any sort of place to buy. But looking at SA3, so data classification by ABS, statistical area 3, and the simplest way I could explain it is a cluster of suburbs. So this is really where that macro research starts, finding cluster of suburbs across the country, what's the right strategy for you, and really looking at it from a perspective of I'm going to remove my blinkers, see what's happening across the country, especially during times of uncertainty. You want to maximize the pockets available to you for you to invest in.
Okay, macro research. What about micro research, step 2?
Well, as we transition from macro to micro, I might just quickly break down some of the things that you might look at macro as you transition to it. One is obviously your infrastructure, what's happening from a market snapshot. And by market snapshot, I'm thinking prices, what are they going for? The makeup of houses, the type of properties, 3 or 4 beds or 5 beds that like to go quite well in that region. And then you start to move into the demographic. Where do people come from? Their unemployment rates, jobs, type of people living and working there, renters versus owners. Then we start moving into trends. And by trends, I look at both price and rents. Some examples are asking prices, sales volumes, inventory, days on market, listings, discounting, and then from rents, vacancy rates, stale listings on market for longer than 3 weeks, days on market from a rent perspective, as well as the yields. So you can start to see them really going deeper into this macro. Now, as we're getting towards the micro, we're still looking at building approvals, because it may look like low stock now, but what happens if a lot of property starts coming on in the future? And so as you go from these macros and you start to go, all right, well, I think the eastern suburbs of Brisbane or Ballarat or Bendigo, these markets look really good for me. Now you're in the micro. And the micro is where you do make or lose money. Because in your make or loss of money, think of paying the right price, finding the right deal versus overpaying. Think comparable sales, comparable rents. Essentially, we're trying to understand, the right price to pay for a property. What will it produce in terms of cash flow? And now we're starting to look at suburb, neighborhood, heat map the area. So essentially, when you're moving from macro to micro, Tom, what you're really now starting to go as a buyer is, I've removed the blinker, I'm looking across the country, and now I'm sitting back and going, well, what's really happening at a suburb and, property level?
Fantastic. Before we get into step 3, so the key sort of takeaway there is you said the word deep, and for good reason. You've listed quite a few things to take into account, particularly when you're choosing the right place to invest. Where does InvestorKit, where do you fit into that picture? I'm trying to think of, me being the investor here. How do you help me with that?
So as a buyer's agency, we're working through these steps with our clients. We're showing the macro and the micros, taking them on this journey, these 5 steps that, come together. And I think what buyers really struggle with at times is there's all these different places to get the data, to patch it all together. And that's where we come in to bring that macro, bring that micro data to not only piece it together, but interpret it. Because having all the data, I think it's fair to say it's out there. But interpreting it, what does it mean? Why is it showing that? What's that lead to? What's that led to? These are things where we come in.
Well, thank God you're here. On to step 3, on the ground review. What does that mean?
So whilst we love the numbers at InvestorKit and looking at all the numbers is such a big passion, when you think of property, someone's living in there, whether it's yourself or a tenant, and prospective people will live in there, whether it's a future tenant. So you've got to understand the street, the neighborhood, the appeal, the goods of the property and the bad, because it's important to know there'll always be both. Even on the shiniest of brand new and all that sort of stuff, there's going to be both the goods and the bad because it's demographic driven. Some people like certain layouts, some don't. And so from that perspective, on the ground is really patching together this data, getting a feel, inspecting it. We take videos for our clients, photos for our clients, and really get them that confidence to know that the data and on the ground matches.
Okay. Step 4, probably one of the biggest ones, particularly to me, that stands out, purchase and due diligence.
Yes.
Explain.
As professionals, when we're looking at the purchase and due diligence steps, yes, there's the key part. What am I going to pay for it? The price. And getting the best price is a very important thing. And when I say the best price, it's actually how you look at what the best is. Now, sometimes there might be a campaign where it's very easily priced in terms of it's not a over-ambitious campaign. The sale is appropriate. And many buyers make a mistake of going in there and thinking, oh, this sales agent's not working for me. Or, well, they aren't, but they always think, well, I'm going to pay $300 instead of $400 like they're asking for. 6 months go by, 12 months go by, they keep missing out on deals and they keep thinking that this area is still right and they just haven't had the right one. So before you find the best price, you have to find the right value. And once you find there, you'll understand the campaign, whether it's a bit too high, just right, or a bit under. So that's the first part when it comes to purchasing. But as you go through due diligence, whether it's a buyer's agent on your team or whether it's yourself or the numbers or even on the ground, the truth is that isn't it. There's other inspectors, pest and building. There's other trades as well that will come in depending on how deep you want to go into those inspections, conveyancers, accountants, so forth. So I think this due diligence gets a few more people in your team together, and that's when you can really start envisioning this property come to life.
Absolutely. Step number 5, post-settlement. Why is this so important?
Well, people think I've bought a property and it's all good, I'm done.
Yeah.
And look, that's not the case at all. I mean, you've got to manage your manager, and that's something we forget. We think our property managers, whilst great, we have to have that relationship that suits you, because they can't imagine that or understand what that is unless you're having those two-way discussions. So managing your manager is one, but people always talk about the perfect distressed deal, the super cheap discount. You need to know if your discounted distressed cheap deal was one in isolation, or is it the new domino effect? Because if more and more and more come up like yours, maybe you didn't really get a cheap deal. And so the key here post-settlement, what we do is actually helping people through our checklist guides and videos manage their property manager, manage their investing risks and finances. But most importantly, we help them assess where the market's at 6 months later, 12 months later, 18 months later, because that's when you know really what you've gotten yourself into and where it's heading.
Putting myself back again in the shoes of the investors here, I'm thinking to myself, Arjun, fantastic. I like the 5-step process. Everything that you've said to me makes sense to me. But what does that mean to me? And if this is something that's it's sort of, get people out of their chairs and investing or getting in touch with you, explain to them why they should be coming to you and how you're going to help them.
Just think for a moment, you're out here looking for property. You're going to start searching and do this all by yourself. And that's totally okay, because there are many investors who will use this information and do that. And that's great. But imagine who you're up against when you see a deep dive process this thorough, this detailed, and you're constantly competing with buyers agents who are out there snapping up property at the right amount. And so from that perspective, that's where if someone's really looking to get a competitive edge in terms of buying, avoid mistakes like overpaying, putting emotion into it, avoid having blinkers on, so they aren't just looking at one backyard location or a suburb they know. They're assessing data with sophistication and professionalism. Then that's where this 5-step process comes in, and that's where we come in. And so what buyers can do or investors can do from that perspective is, reach out to us at investorkit.com.au. We'll put a link at the bottom of this in terms of how to get in touch. And that's where we can assess if we are the right fit to help them with a 5-step process like this.
Fantastic. Well, if this sounds like you listening to in your car or at home or on your computer, I implore you to get in touch with Arjun. As I said, he's worked with us for quite some time and he's not going away anytime soon. But look, I think I vouch for buyers agents across the country here. And I think now is more than ever a time that we need you, particularly through this second wave of uncertainty. There's obviously, a lot of opportunity out there whilst there is low stock, but at the same time, with your help, I believe that the right purchase is possible. But Arjun, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tom.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property, or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.